She just wanted to raise money for her treatment by selling lemonade. But when she was attacked by a man in uniform, everything froze. No one expected who would show up a second later. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments and post where you're watching this video from. The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds, casting soft golden lines across the faded floral wallpaper of the small bedroom. The air inside the modest home was still and quiet, the kind of stillness that clung to moments that felt heavier than they looked. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up with the slow hum of lawnmowers and the clinking of dishes through open kitchen windows. But inside the room, Layla sat upright on her neatly made bed, her thin legs dangling above the floor, swinging absently as she looked down at the stuffed bunny in her lap. Her name was Layla James, 8 years old, dark-skinned, small for her age, with eyes far older than they should have been. Her hair was pulled into 2 neat puffs by her mother that morning, tied with sky-blue ribbons. Beneath her oversized t-shirt, her body was frail. Her illness, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, had carved away at her childhood with silent persistence. But Layla never talked about pain. She never wanted to be the reason her mother cried again. The house they lived in stood at the edge of a quiet suburban street. Small, 1-story with flaking paint on the porch rail and an uneven walkway where the concrete had cracked from age and neglect. The house didn't matter to Layla, though. It was home. It held her mother's scent, the laughter of old birthday mornings, and the safety of the one person in the world who always said yes when everything else said no. Her mother, Michelle James, was a woman who had grown accustomed to exhaustion. As a full-time nurse, Michelle worked 2 jobs, day shifts at the county hospital and overnight rotations at a nearby clinic. She rarely slept more than 4 hours at a time, and yet, every morning, she found the energy to braid Layla's hair, pack her snacks, and whisper, "You're my brave girl," as she kissed her forehead. On that particular morning, Layla had risen earlier than usual. Her hands, though thin and stiff from fatigue, were steady as she arranged the small plastic table and folding chair near the sidewalk in front of their house. She carried with her a box of soft, hand-sewn plushies, tiny bears, smiling suns, crooked cats, each one a product of quiet evenings in bed with a needle, thread, and her mother's old t-shirt scraps. Next to the plushies were her hand-drawn cards, bright, clumsy rainbows, flowers with faces, birds in the sky with words like hope, thank you, and smile anyway. Her sign was written in big, shaky letters on a scrap piece of cardboard. It read, "Lemonade and toys, all for my treatment. Thank you." The cardboard was taped to an old crate. Beside it stood a repurposed pickle jar with a slit in the lid and coins clinking softly inside. Layla sat in the folding chair and waited. The sun rose higher. A breeze passed. She looked up at the sky and whispered something to herself. Maybe a wish, maybe a prayer, or maybe just a word of encouragement from a child who had learned to coach herself through bad days. It didn't take long before the first neighbor passed by. Mr. Anders, who lived 2 doors down and always wore khaki shorts and white socks with sandals, gave her a nod but didn't stop. Then came an older woman with a grocery bag who looked at the sign, smiled faintly, and dropped a $5 bill in the jar without saying a word. Layla thanked her with a soft, "God bless you," and offered a sunshine plushie. The woman took it with a tight smile and walked on. By midday, Layla had made about $30. A few people bought lemonade in small paper cups. A teenage boy on a skateboard bought 2 drawings, said his little sister liked cats. Layla smiled every time, polite, steady, never pushing, never begging, But not everyone was kind. A man in a business suit walked by talking loudly on his phone, looked at her stand, and muttered something about unsanitary kids on sidewalks. A woman in a luxury SUV slowed down just to scowl and took a picture of the sign before driving off. Layla watched but said nothing. She had learned that some people passed by kindness the same way they passed puddles, stepping around it without ever looking down. That night, after the sun dipped and the clouds turned gold, Layla came back inside. Her mother was home early, only by an hour, but it was enough. Michelle helped her into the tub, washed her hair, and noticed the bruise on her left arm from where she'd bumped the crate. Then came the nosebleed, sudden, heavy, and hard to stop. Michelle's hands trembled slightly as she held a cold rag to her daughter's face, whispering, it's okay, baby," over and over. Layla didn't cry. She just blinked and squeezed her mother's fingers. When the bleeding stopped, Michelle carried her to bed. "You don't have to do the stand tomorrow," she said softly. "You need rest." "But I want to," Layla whispered. "I want to try." Michelle looked at her child, so small, so light in her arms, with skin pale beneath the soft light, and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle on her chest. She nodded, kissed Layla's forehead, and said, "Okay, but only for a little while." They didn't talk about how much money was needed. They didn't talk about the rejection from the insurance company or the letter from the German clinic that offered a better chance. They didn't talk about how flights alone cost more than Michelle made in a month. Instead, they talked about the bunny plushie Layla wanted to sew tomorrow and how maybe she could name it Mr. Chuckles. That night, Layla dreamed of a field of flowers. She ran through it barefoot, hair untied, wind in her ears. She didn't wake up tired the next morning. She woke up hopeful. By midweek, she had collected close to $90. It wasn't much, not against the mountain of medical bills, but it was hers. It was proof that she could do something. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to see her mother cry in the kitchen again, thinking Layla couldn't hear her. She wanted to fight, even if she was just a kid, especially because she was just a kid. But storms don't always come with warnings. Some arrive in silence, behind smiles or uniforms or rules. And for Layla, that storm would arrive with heavy boots, mirrored sunglasses, and a badge worn without honor. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, she slept again, peacefully, her hand resting on a piece of felt she would turn into another little toy. Tomorrow, she thought, I'll make someone smile. She had no idea someone would come to make her cry, and even less idea who would come to stop it. The following morning carried with it the warm hush of summer, the kind that settled heavily in the air and clung to windows and windshields. The street looked the same, but it felt different. Beneath the chirping of birds and the distant barking of a dog, there was a tension, though neither Layla nor her mother could name it. Michelle had left early again, kissing her daughter gently before hurrying off to catch the bus. Layla ate 2 spoonfuls of oatmeal, barely managing the third. Her body ached from inside, deep in the bones where it was hardest to reach, but she said nothing. She had already packed her small folding chair and the container of plushies the night before. The sign, creased and a little weather-worn, still stood upright, fastened to the milk crate with twine. By 9:30, she was outside again. The sun wasn't too harsh yet, and she had shaded her little stand with a tattered beach umbrella, one with faded palm trees and a cartoon sun. Layla smoothed out her drawings on the table and poured herself a cup of warm lemonade. She had made it the night before with just enough sugar and a pinch of real lemon juice from a bottle. For the first hour, it was quiet. A man walking his dog dropped $1 in the jar. A pair of giggling girls on bicycles waved as they passed. Layla waved back, smiling. Every interaction was a thread, thin, delicate, but real, that connected her to the world beyond her pain. By 10:15, the air had grown heavier, stickier, and Layla had just sold a hand-sewn purple cat with button eyes when a shadow fell over her stand. At first, she thought it was the umbrella shifting, but then the voice came. Harsh, deep, not loud, but packed with the kind of control that doesn't ask. It commands. "What is this?" She looked up. A man stood over her, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark blue uniform. His belt was cluttered with gear, radio, cuffs, baton. His sunglasses reflected the entire stand and her own wide-eyed face. On his chest, a badge gleamed, Kelton. Layla blinked, unsure whether to speak. She managed a timid, "Hi. I asked you a question," he snapped, voice low but urgent. "What is this? You running a business?" She swallowed. I'm raising money for my treatment." "Treatment?" He took a step forward. "That doesn't exempt you from the law. Do you have a license to operate a retail booth?" No, sir," she said, stumbling. These are toys I made. People give money if they want. I didn't know I needed—" "You're obstructing pedestrian flow," he cut her off. "You've placed unsanitary items on public property, and you're selling food products without clearance from the health department." Layla didn't know what half of those words meant, but she knew his tone was angry. He reached out and yanked the sign from the crate, tearing it halfway down the middle. She gasped, "Please don't!" He turned over the crate with a swift motion, sending toys tumbling onto the sidewalk. The jar of money clinked violently and nearly tipped, but Layla caught it. "Sir, please," she tried again, her voice cracking. "I'm just trying to help my mom. I have cancer." His jaw tightened. For a moment, he hesitated, just long enough for a shadow of doubt to flicker across his face. But then he narrowed his eyes. "That's not my concern," he said. "The city has rules. You can't just throw a sob story and expect immunity." He pointed a gloved finger at her. "You are in violation of municipal code and liable for fines, as well as possible referral to child services for unsupervised public conduct." Her throat closed. Her mouth was dry. She clutched the jar to her chest, trembling. A woman jogging past slowed, but then looked away and hurried on. He knelt beside the fallen toys, picked one up, examined it with disgust, and tossed it back onto the concrete. "What is this supposed to be?" "It's a sunshine bear," she whispered. "I made it." "Looks like garbage," he muttered, then louder, "You're littering." She stared at him, trying not to cry, but her body betrayed her. A tear slipped down her cheek, and then another. "I'll be filing a report," he said, straightening. "Expect your mother to hear from the city before the week's over." She didn't understand what she had done wrong. The words, filing a report, made her stomach twist. What if they took her away? What if they arrested her mom? He turned to leave, but then stopped. He looked at the jar in her hands. "Hand that over." Layla instinctively stepped back. "No." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "I said, give it here." "It's mine," she said, clutching it tighter. "It's for my chemo, please." He moved fast, too fast. He lunged for the jar and she shrieked, falling back into her chair. His hand stopped inches from her. From across the street, someone shouted, "Hey!" The officer paused. Layla looked up through teary eyes to see a man standing on his porch, phone in hand, recording. The man didn't say anything more, just stared, The camera lens pointed steadily at the officer. Officer Kelton slowly lowered his hand. His voice lost its bite. "This isn't over," he muttered. Then he turned and walked away, his heavy boots slamming the pavement. Layla sat frozen for several minutes. The toys lay in the dirt, their seams stained. Her sign was torn. The umbrella had tilted sideways. The money jar trembled in her hands. She didn't notice the growing crowd on the sidewalk. A few murmured to each other, but none approached. Most just stared. Eventually, someone helped her gather the toys, an older man with a beard and soft eyes. He didn't speak, just picked them up and handed them to her quietly. Another woman handed Layla tissue. The man with the phone disappeared inside his house. Others followed suit. Soon, the street was quiet again. But something inside Layla had shifted. She sat with the box in her lap, wiping her face, trying to fix the torn sign with trembling fingers. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the fear or the humiliation. The afternoon sun burned against her skin, but she stayed. She stayed until her mother came home and found her sleeping on the chair, head resting against the crate, arms wrapped around the jar. That night, Michelle was a storm of emotion. She cried, raged, called the local precinct only to be told that Officer Kelton wasn't currently assigned to patrols. "We'll look into it," they had said with the robotic tone of disinterest. Layla said nothing. She only asked for her sign to be repaired. "I just want to try again tomorrow," she said softly. Michelle wanted to say no, wanted to protect her. But then she saw the fire behind her daughter's eyes, the stubbornness, the quiet courage. She nodded. "Okay, but not alone." Layla smiled. "I won't be." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was faith, or hope, or the instinct children sometimes have that someone was coming. Not yet, but soon. The wind blew gently through the cracked window. Somewhere outside, leaves rustled. In the distance, the faint sound of a crowd echoed from the nearby sports field. And, along with it, the names of two people whose footsteps would soon change everything. Layla didn't sleep well that night. She tossed, dreaming of boots and broken signs, of sunshine bears crushed under heels. But in the final moment before morning, another dream came. Two tall figures walking down her street, one with fists like stone, the other with eyes like fire. She didn't know their names yet, but she would. The morning after Officer Kelton's assault dawned with an unsettling stillness. The sky was a pale blue, brushed with clouds like thin gauze, and the air held the heaviness of something left unresolved. Layla stood in front of the house, her feet bare on the porch steps, watching as the neighborhood stirred to life. The makeshift stand from the day before sat broken and lopsided where it had fallen, a casualty of misplaced authority. The fabric toys were scattered across the porch in a laundry basket her mother had repurposed the night before. The sign had been taped back together, but the crease down the middle still showed like a scar. Michelle had begged her to stay inside, at least for the morning, to rest and recover. But Layla had refused. There was something in her chest, something stronger than fear now. She didn't know what to call it, only that it made her want to sit at that table again, to show the world, and maybe herself, that she hadn't been broken. Not yet. A few streets away, the city park buzzed with energy. A veterans' charity event was underway, complete with a martial arts demonstration stage, food stalls, and booths honoring local heroes. The crowd was modest but spirited. Among them moved two figures whose presence caused subtle ripples through every group they passed. Chuck Norris stood tall despite his age, his frame lean but powerful, wrapped in a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Beside him, Ronda Rousey walked with a casual confidence, her hair tied back, her posture loose but alert. The two had been invited as guests of honor, and though they had already given their speeches, signed autographs, and posed for photos, neither seemed in a rush to leave. After the event began to wind down, Chuck suggested a walk. Ronda agreed instantly. "Let's see what this neighborhood's really like," she had said, gesturing towards the quieter residential streets just beyond the park fence. Their pace was unhurried, their conversation easy. But as they turned a corner onto Layla's block, Chuck's expression subtly changed. His eyes, trained over decades to notice what others ignored, landed on the tilted crate, the torn sign, and the girl sitting beside them with her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Ronda saw it too. Layla looked even smaller in person, her skin pale, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. Her mother sat beside her on the porch step, speaking softly, trying to coax her inside. Layla only shook her head. Chuck stopped walking. "Something happened here," he said. Ronda followed his gaze. "Looks like someone stomped through a dream." Without another word, they crossed the street. Layla noticed them first. She squinted, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. When Ronda knelt in front of the table and gently lifted one of the toys from the basket, Layla's breath caught in her throat. Then Chuck crouched beside her and looked at the taped sign. "Hi there," Ronda said, her voice warm. "Did you make this?" Layla nodded slowly. "For my treatment," she murmured. "Chemo." Chuck glanced at Michelle, who had risen, startled, from the porch. Recognition passed over her face like a wave, her hand instinctively moving to her mouth. "May we sit?" Chuck asked. They sat with her for several minutes. Ronda asked about the toys. Chuck asked about the lemonade. Layla answered quietly, her voice regaining strength with each question. Then Michelle stepped forward and began telling the story. Everything. The illness, the lack of insurance, the handmade stand, and finally, Officer Kelton. Rhonda's eyes darkened as she listened. "He did what?" Chuck didn't speak at first. He was still listening carefully, the way someone does when they are processing not just words, but the weight behind them. "He said we were violating city codes," Michelle said bitterly. "Said he'd called Child Protective Services. My daughter was crying on the ground." Chuck stood, his expression unreadable. "Where is he now?" "He left, but he said he'd come back," Layla whispered. Rhonda exchanged a glance with Chuck. "Let's stay for a bit." No sooner had she said it than a familiar sound broke the calm. A patrol cruiser's slow roll down the block. It wasn't an official vehicle. Older, unmarked, but they recognized the man behind the wheel. Officer Kelton stepped out, sunglasses in place, mouth set in a hard line. He hadn't noticed them yet. His eyes were fixed on Layla. "I told you yesterday," he began, voice loud enough for the whole street to hear, "this stand has to go." Layla froze. Michelle took a step forward, protective. Then Kelton saw them. He stopped mid-stride, his face flickering with confusion. "Sir," Chuck said evenly, "we were just hearing about you." Kelton narrowed his eyes. "This is none of your business." "You made it our business," Rhonda said, stepping in front of the crate, "when you harassed a sick child." Kelton bristled. "I followed code. Unauthorized sales on public property. I have full authority." "You're not even on duty," Michelle snapped. "They said you're not even with the department anymore." Kelton's jaw flexed. "I'm still an officer?" "Not today, you're not," Chuck replied calmly. and not here. For a long moment, silence reigned. Kelton's hand hovered near his belt. Not on his gun. He wasn't that foolish, but near enough to threaten. His posture stiffened. Then he lunged forward, trying to push past them toward the table. Ronda moved first. Her arm blocked his path, her hand pressing into his chest. "You don't want to do that," she said coldly. Kelton tried to shove her aside. The mistake cost him. In one swift movement, she deflected his arm and twisted it behind his back. Chuck was already beside them, stepping in just as Kelton tried to spin free. With a firm grip, Chuck planted him face down on the sidewalk, his knee gently but decisively pressing into his back. A chorus of gasps echoed down the street. Phones came out. Neighbors emerged from houses. The same man who had filmed yesterday reappeared, recording again. "You okay?" Chuck asked, glancing back at Layla. She nodded, her eyes wide, but no longer afraid. Michelle was shaken. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the real cops this time. By the time the cruiser arrived, the video had already begun circulating online. Layla stood beside her stand, toys once again neatly arranged, while officers spoke with Chuck and Ronda. The supervising sergeant reviewed footage, listened to witness statements, and finally turned to Kelton. "You're under arrest for impersonating an officer and assault." Kelton's face crumpled into a mixture of disbelief and fury. "They started it." "No," the sergeant said, "they finished it." As the cuffs clicked into place, Kelton's eyes met Layla's one last time. "You think you won?" he snarled. Chuck stepped between them. "She didn't win," he said. "She stood her ground. That's more than you ever did." The officers led Kelton to the car. The crowd applauded. Quietly at first, then with growing momentum. Ronda turned back to Layla and smiled. "You're tougher than you look," she said. Chuck knelt beside her. "Keep fighting." Layla nodded. "I will." That night, the video of the confrontation went viral. Not just because it showed justice, but because it showed something deeper. A little girl, weakened by illness, refusing to give up, and the legends who stood beside her when the world didn't. And Layla, in her bed, finally slept without fear. By dawn, the next day, Layla's street was quieter than usual. The air, still heavy with the scent of early summer grass and warm pavement, felt calmer, less tense. But inside her small home, the energy was anything but ordinary. Michelle's phone buzzed nonstop on the kitchen counter. Notifications piled up, one after another. Calls, texts, emails from addresses she'd never seen before. She stood in her bathrobe, a mug of untouched coffee trembling slightly in her hand, as she watched Layla sleep soundly on the couch. Arms curled around the sunshine bear Ronda had returned to her after picking it up from the pavement the day before. The television murmured in the background. A local news anchor, overly cheerful and too made up for the early hour, was finishing a segment with a picture of Layla's cardboard sign on the screen behind her. A little girl with a big heart and bigger bravery, 8-year-old Layla James stood her ground against a disgraced former officer with help from none other than Chuck Norris and Ronda Rousey. More on this heartwarming story after the break. Michelle turned the volume down. She couldn't believe it. Not just the news coverage, but the way the neighborhood had responded after the incident. The same people who watched from behind curtains were now dropping off flowers on the porch, envelopes with notes and cash, and one woman even brought groceries. It was as if the entire community had remembered they had hearts. All it took was a sick little girl refusing to back down, and two legends arriving at the right moment to remind everyone what courage looked like. By noon, Michelle had received 5 different interview requests from local radio, a cable news affiliate, and even a national morning talk show. One of them included an offer to fly them to New York for a studio appearance. Layla, still in her pajamas, had listened with wide eyes as her mother tried to explain everything. "Do I have to talk on TV?" Layla asked, clutching her stuffed bear. "Only if you want to," Michelle said softly, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "You don't owe anyone anything." "But if I do, maybe more people will help," Layla said. "Maybe we can go to the doctor faster." That sentence struck Michelle like a stone. She nodded, biting her lip, and began making arrangements. By late afternoon, the video of the confrontation had been seen over 4 million times. It showed Rhonda stepping between Layla and Kelton, Chuck pinning the disgraced officer to the pavement, and Layla's trembling voice thanking them afterward. But it was more than a viral moment. It was a story that felt real, one that pierced the armor of cynicism the internet usually wore. Comment sections overflowed with support, donations, and messages from strangers who called Layla a warrior, a light, a symbol of the kind of strength the world had forgotten it needed. A popular content creator reshared the video with a caption, "This is what heroes look like, not just Chuck and Rhonda, this little girl." Donations surged. A GoFundMe link, originally set up by a local nurse after the news aired, ballooned in hours. The original goal had been $20,000. By sundown, it had surpassed $100,000. Michelle's hands shook as she refreshed the page again and again. Each time, more numbers appeared, more names, more faith. That evening, the doorbell rang. When Michelle opened it, she found Rhonda standing on the porch, dressed in sweats, a backpack slung over her shoulder, and a duffel bag in hand. Her face was tired but kind. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I figured you might need backup today." Michelle stepped aside, her voice caught in her throat. "You came back." "I told her I would," Ronda said. "Besides, we're not done yet." She knelt in front of Layla, who sat on the couch, now wearing a clean shirt and jeans. Her eyes lit up when she saw her again. "I brought something," Ronda said, unzipping the duffel. From inside, she pulled out a pair of child-sized boxing gloves, pink with black trim and Ronda's autograph scrawled in silver ink. "For the toughest fighter I've met all year." Layla giggled, slipping them on clumsily. "They're a little big." "You'll grow into them," Ronda said. "That's the plan, right?" Layla nodded. "I want to be strong like you." "You already are." That night, Chuck arrived too, quietly, with less fanfare, parking a few houses down and walking the rest of the way. He brought with him a hardback book from his personal collection, dog-eared and worn from years of reading. Inside the front cover, he had written in clean block letters, "Layla, strength lives in the heart, not the hands. Chuck Norris." They stayed for dinner, sitting at the small table in the narrow kitchen, eating pasta with paper napkins and mismatched silverware. Michelle watched them both with a dazed gratitude she couldn't put into words. Layla laughed more that night than she had in months. The next morning, a team of volunteers arrived from the community center to help repair the stand. They brought fresh wood, new paint, and a clear plastic roof to protect it from the rain. Rhonda and Chuck helped assemble it, Rhonda on the ground with tools, Chuck supervising with the kind of meticulousness that only came from years of building more than just objects. The new sign was hand-painted with acrylics on real wood, bold and beautiful. Layla's Hope Stand, handmade joy and lemonade. Below that, in smaller cursive, every dollar is a step toward healing. Michelle tried to protest when another woman from the charity group announced that a second fundraiser was already underway. A silent auction, a raffle, a bake sale. People were lining up to help now, but it wasn't just charity. It was something different. Layla was no longer a passive recipient. She had become a cause, a rallying cry, a mirror reflecting the community's better self back at them. On Saturday, just 4 days after the confrontation, a segment aired on a major morning news show. Layla, wearing a soft blue dress and her new gloves draped around her neck, sat between her mother and Ronda, answering questions with calm grace. The anchor leaned forward, her voice sugary. "Layla, what would you say to people who want to help kids like you?" Layla hesitated, then said, "Believe us. Even if we're small, we're still here. We're trying." It was that quote, 7 words, that sealed her story in the hearts of millions. By Monday, the GoFundMe had passed $300,000. Michelle received a call from the International Hospital in Germany. They would accept Layla as a patient. The logistics were discussed, appointments made, travel coordinated, and through it all, Chuck and Ronda stayed close. Not every day, not every hour, but always within reach. They didn't hover or take credit. They showed up when needed and disappeared when they knew it was time to let Layla shine. One afternoon, as Layla sat beneath her newsstand, signing a card for a girl in Colorado who'd written to say she was sick too, Chuck approached with a smile. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the crate beside her. She nodded, and he sat. "Do you know what courage really is?" he asked. Layla looked up. "Doing something scary, even when you're afraid?" Chuck smiled. "Close. Courage is standing up when nobody else will, even when it's hard, even when you don't know how it'll end. You did that." She nodded slowly. "But I had help." "Only after you stood first." Ronda joined them minutes later holding a cup of lemonade she'd poured herself. "You should consider franchising," she joked. Layla grinned. "I'm not sure what that means, but I'll think about it." They laughed together, the sound bright against the background of neighborhood life. Dogs barking, cars passing, children shouting down the street. The chaos of that one terrible day felt far away now. The stand stood taller, stronger, more colorful. Layla's hair was thinner, her arms smaller, but her presence had grown. She no longer looked like a girl clinging to hope. She looked like someone who had become it. The days that followed brought a kind of calm that Layla had almost forgotten could exist. For the first time in many months, the air in their home felt lighter, the silence less heavy. There was laughter again, even if it was quiet and cautious. Michelle stopped pacing the kitchen late at night. The mail, once filled with cold hospital bills and rejection letters, now brought postcards from strangers, care packages, and warm handwritten notes from across the country. On the porch, Layla sat beneath her new wooden stand, painting small stones with bright colors to sell beside her toys, each one stamped with a word: hope, fight, grow, shine. She liked the quiet now, not because it meant nothing was happening, but because it felt like peace had finally been earned. But peace, as her mother had learned the hard way, is a fragile thing. And sometimes the people most threatened by light are those already drowning in their own darkness. Officer James Kelton had been processed, charged, and released on bond within 48 hours. It had taken one well-paid lawyer and a carefully constructed argument about excessive force and media-fueled misrepresentation to convince a judge that he wasn't a threat. No conviction yet, no trial date set, just time. Time enough for resentment to fester. He hadn't taken the humiliation well. Not the video, not the headlines, not the public ridicule. The name Kelton had become a joke, a trending punchline in internet memes and angry editorials. He couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone whispering behind his back. His sisters stopped answering his calls. Even his former colleagues refused to meet his eyes. But none of it stung like that girl's face. That small, sick child looking at him with fear, not because he had power, but because he had used it like a weapon. And then, those two celebrities, he'd never forget the looks on their faces, as if they saw right through him, as if he wasn't even worth their anger. It didn't matter to him that Layla was just a kid. What mattered was that she had been the beginning of his downfall. And, in his mind, if she hadn't stood out there with her little sign and her jar, he wouldn't have been filmed, wouldn't have been mocked, wouldn't have lost the last shred of control he had over his life. The thought haunted him. Obsession rooted itself deep inside him like a splinter under skin, unnoticed at first, then constantly aching. He spent hours watching the video again and again, as if replaying it would change what had happened. He knew the neighborhood, knew the street, knew the house. On a Tuesday evening, just after sunset, Kelton sat in a rusted pickup parked 4 houses away from Layla's stand. The engine was off, the windows rolled down. He wore an old hoodie, the sleeves pushed up to hide the scar where the cuffs had rubbed his wrists raw. On the passenger seat sat a duffel bag with spray paint, a flashlight, and a pair of brass knuckles. He wasn't sure what he was going to do exactly. He only knew he needed to make her afraid again, needed to remind her and everyone else that he wasn't gone, that they hadn't won. Inside the house, Layla was brushing her teeth. She hummed softly, the bathroom door half open. Michelle had run to the pharmacy for a prescription refill and would be home in 10 minutes. The street was quiet. The neighbors were inside. Porch lights glowed warmly, unaware of what moved in their shadow. Kelton stepped out of the truck, moving quickly but quietly. He approached the stand like it was prey, scanning the windows, making sure no one was watching. Then, with one hard kick, he knocked over the crate. The painted rocks scattered, the drawings ripped beneath the weight of the wood. He grabbed the sign and tore it in two, dropping it into the dirt. Then he pulled the spray paint can from his bag and scrawled a red word across the side of the porch. Liar. The hiss of paint echoed louder than he expected. Layla heard it. She turned off the faucet and stepped into the hallway, peeking through the front window. Her heart stopped. He was there. The same man. His back was to her, but she recognized the way he moved. He turned and looked directly at the door. Their eyes met. For a second, he didn't move. Neither did she. Then she reached for the phone, but Kelton was already moving. He crossed the porch in 2 strides and banged his fist against the door. "You think this is over?" he growled. "You don't get to humiliate me and walk away." Layla backed away, phone trembling in her hands. Her voice caught in her throat. She tried to scream, but it came out as a whimper. And then she heard the gravel crunch behind the house. A shadow moved in the alley. Heavy footsteps. Another door opened. Kelton froze. "What do you think you're doing?" Ronda Rousey's voice cut through the night like steel. She emerged from the side gate, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, her eyes locked on him like a predator. Kelton turned, startled. "Stay out of this," he snapped, but Ronda didn't stop. She stepped between him and the door. "You made a mistake coming back here." He raised his hand, showing the brass knuckles glinting in the porch light. "You think I'm scared of you?" She didn't answer. She stepped forward again. He lunged. She dodged the first swing easily, twisting sideways and grabbing his arm. With one smooth motion, she twisted his wrist and knocked the knuckles loose. They clattered to the porch floor. He tried to shove her, but her knee met his stomach mid-motion, knocking the air from his lungs. He stumbled back, but before he could recover, another figure stepped out from the darkness. Chuck Norris. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He reached Kelton in 2 strides, seized his jacket collar, and lifted him off his feet. The former officer thrashed wildly, but Chuck barely flinched. "You came to the wrong house," he said coldly, and dropped him flat onto the lawn. The neighbors had come outside now. Lights flicked on across the street. People watched from porches, cameras recording, but this time no one stayed silent. They began calling 911 in unison. Michelle's car screeched to a halt in front of the house. She bolted from the driver's seat, racing toward the porch just as Layla opened the door. The little girl ran into her mother's arms, shaking, unable to speak. Chuck picked up the brass knuckles, holding them in one hand like a badge of shame. Ronda stood over Kelton, breathing hard, her voice low. "Try it again," she said. "I dare you." He didn't move. The fight had drained from his eyes. By the time the real officers arrived, Kelton was face down, zip-tied with duct tape Chuck had pulled from his truck. He didn't struggle, didn't speak. He was arrested on the spot for trespassing, harassment, assault, and violation of bail conditions. The media came again the next morning. The footage was even clearer this time. Layla's painted stand in the background. The word liar still faintly visible under a tarp. And the unmistakable image of Chuck Norris and Ronda Rousey standing on either side of her like sentinels. But this time, something had changed. Layla was no longer the victim. She was the girl who had survived 3 attacks, illness, injustice, and now vengeance, and was still standing. And this time, the whole world wasn't just watching. It was listening. When the dust settled, the street stood in solemn stillness, like a room holding its breath. Days passed, and then weeks. The red graffiti that had once screamed from the porch was gone, painted over by a team of volunteers. The porch steps had been scrubbed clean, the broken toys replaced with new ones, lovingly donated by strangers across the country. The stand itself, Layla's stand, had been rebuilt again, this time with reinforced wood, waterproof paint, and a small solar-powered light that kept it glowing softly at night. A gold plaque was affixed to one of the support beams. It read, "Here stood courage. Here still stands hope." Layla didn't return to the stand right away. Her mother insisted on rest, and for once, Layla agreed. The adrenaline from the last encounter had drained her. Even the strongest fighters need recovery. Her energy was thin, and some mornings she could barely lift her arms. But something in her spirit had shifted. The fear that once weighed like a stone in her chest was gone. In its place was something quieter, deeper. Confidence not in safety, but in her own ability to endure. The paperwork for her treatment overseas had moved faster than anyone expected. The hospital in Germany had reviewed her records and accepted her immediately. Michelle spent nights emailing specialists, filling out visa forms, coordinating logistics. When the final call came confirming their travel date, Michelle wept. Not quietly. Not in that controlled way she'd learned to cry after years of being a nurse. She wept like a mother who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders and had finally found someone willing to take a piece of it. The neighborhood held a farewell gathering on the Friday before their flight. It wasn't a big event, just a few families, some kids, a cake baked by the lady next door, and lemonade poured into mismatched paper cups. The air was thick with summer warmth, and fireflies blinked lazily in the bushes. Chuck arrived quietly, as he always did, wearing a faded ball cap and carrying a small toolbox. Ronda came too, arms full of snacks and stories from her last fight event. Layla sat in the shade, her legs curled beneath her on a plastic lawn chair. She wore a soft scarf over her head, the last of her hair mostly gone now, and her eyes a little glassier than before. But she smiled easily, laughed when the little kids made jokes, and handed out her painted stones to every guest. Each stone was different. Some bright yellow, some lavender, a few bold red, and each one had a single word on it. Brave, begin, heal, rise. Before the night ended, Chuck asked if she could step away with him for a moment. He led her to the side of the house where it was quiet, the sounds of laughter and clinking cups fading behind them. I brought something, he said, reaching into his back pocket. It was an envelope, thick and sealed with a piece of duct tape. It's not a donation. It's a seed. Use it for whatever you grow next. Layla took it, feeling the weight. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Her hands trembled slightly, and she blinked away the emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Chuck looked at her carefully, his gaze steady. You already built something that outlived fear. Now build something that lasts longer than pain. Later, when Ronda hugged her goodbye, she whispered, "Next time I want a rematch in thumb wrestling. You got better." Layla grinned. "I practiced." Michelle said goodbye with tears in her eyes. She hugged Ronda like a sister and Chuck like a father. There were no grand speeches, just gratitude that passed from hand to hand, word to word, like something sacred. The flight was long. Layla slept most of the way, curled under a donated blanket, her bear tucked under her chin. Michelle watched her daughter sleep and silently counted each breath like it was gold. They arrived in Germany on a foggy morning, greeted at the airport by a translator and a nurse who already knew Layla's name. The hospital was white and warm, filled with windows and light. The doctors were kind, the nurses attentive. Her treatments began the very next day. The first rounds were hard. The medication was strong, stronger than anything Layla had received back home. She vomited often, lost even more weight, and sometimes didn't speak for days. But the doctors kept encouraging her, and Michelle never left her side. They kept the sunshine bear near her pillow. They hung pictures from home near the bed, her stand, the painted rocks, a drawing of Chuck and Ronda she had made with crayon. The nurses started calling her the Little Lion. One of them bought her a notebook with a gold cover and wrote on the first page, "When you can't roar, just write." So she did. Between treatments, between the long hours of nausea and the quiet afternoons when the room was too bright to sleep, Layla wrote. Stories, letters, thoughts. She wrote a thank you letter to Ronda and Chuck, and another to her neighbors. She wrote to herself, too, a future version of Layla who would one day walk without pain. After 2 months, the scans came in. The treatment was working, slowly but clearly. The tumors were shrinking. The color returned to her face. Her energy began to creep back in cautious doses. She started sitting up longer, then standing, then walking the hallway, waving at nurses. Her laugh returned, softer but real. When they boarded the plane home, Michelle held the doctor's final report like a sacred scroll. It didn't say cure, not yet, but it said progress. It said hope, and that was enough. Back home, the house was decorated with yellow streamers. The neighbors waited in the yard with signs and cheers. A new sign hung from the porch. "Welcome home, Layla the Lion." She smiled shyly as the car pulled up, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people. Kids ran to hug her. Someone played music. Someone else handed her a lemonade. Chuck and Ronda were there too. Of course they were, as if they had never left. Ronda scooped her into a gentle hug, whispering, "You're tougher than ever." Chuck gave her a nod and a grin. "You look taller." That night, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights began to hum, Layla walked to her stand. It was dusty, but still standing, just as she had left it. She touched the smooth wood, ran her fingers over the plaque. Then she opened the drawer beneath the table and pulled out a bag of new rocks. She began painting again. Not to sell, but to give. She wasn't raising money anymore. She was raising others. The next morning, she opened her stand not as a fundraiser, but as a place of kindness. She called it Layla's Corner. Every child who passed could take a toy or a painted stone, free. Her sign said, "Take what you need. Leave what you can. You are seen." And people did. Some left change, some left notes. One boy left a drawing of his dog. A teenage girl dropped off bracelets she had made. The stand had become more than a symbol. It was a living thing now, growing roots in the community. It reminded people what could happen when you fight for something bigger than yourself. Michelle sat on the porch most evenings, watching her daughter hand out toys and talk to neighbors. She rarely spoke anymore about the fear that had ruled their lives. She didn't need to. It was gone. And every now and then, just before the stars came out, Layla would look up the street, waiting. Not because she was afraid, but because part of her hoped she'd see them again. Her protectors, her friends. And one evening, just as the sun melted into the rooftops, they came, walking side by side. No spotlight, no crowd, just two quiet figures who knew that sometimes the greatest strength is just showing up. Layla ran to them, arms wide, her smile full and real. "Guess what?" she said breathlessly. "What?" Ronda asked, kneeling. "I'm going to help someone else now." Chuck's eyes crinkled. "I figured you would." And just like that, the lion stood a little taller. The storm had passed, but the light had stayed. The air was softer now, the kind of soft that only comes after a storm has passed, after the floodwaters have receded and the skies have stopped testing the roof. Layla's neighborhood had changed in small but noticeable ways. People smiled more. They waved instead of just nodding. Children played closer to the sidewalks again, and parents lingered outside longer after sunset. The weight that had pressed silently against the community had lifted, even if no one could say exactly when. And at the center of it all was a stand, still modest, still made of wood and string and hope, but no longer a cry for help. It had become something else. Layla called it her corner now. Not a stand, not a fundraiser. A corner. A place where people came not to give, not to take, but to share. Every day after school, children from all over the block stopped by to leave something. A toy, a drawing, a bottle cap made into a pin, or to take something with them. A stone painted with the word "breathe." A plushie shaped like a cloud. A letter from Layla, folded and signed with a tiny heart and the words, "You matter." She no longer wore her scarf every day. Her hair had begun to grow back, soft and curly, a thin halo that framed her face like the beginning of a sunrise. Her arms were still thin, her legs still tired by afternoon, but her eyes had sharpened. Not hardened. Sharpened. Like she had learned to see both the beauty and the burden in people, and chose to meet both with grace. Michelle watched her daughter now with something deeper than pride. It was reverence. Quiet, enduring reverence for a child who had carried more weight than any child should and still found room to carry others. On one quiet afternoon, Layla sat behind the stand, stringing together a necklace made from buttons and twine. Across the street, a boy sat alone on the curb. He was maybe 10, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. His clothes were rumpled, his shoes unlaced, and his hands clutched something close to his chest. A deflated basketball. Layla watched him for a long moment. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry, but something in the way his shoulders curled inwards made her heart ache. She stood, walked slowly to the edge of the sidewalk, and sat down on the grass. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. Finally, she asked, "Is that your ball?" He nodded without looking at her. "Did something happen to it?" "It popped," he muttered. "One of the older kids stabbed it with a stick." Layla glanced at the basketball. The side was torn, like it had been gutted. It sagged in his arms like a balloon that had given up. "I'm sorry," she said. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "Yeah," she said softly. "It does." He glanced at her then. His eyes were dark and swollen, not from crying, but from holding back too long. "They said I shouldn't be on the court, that I wasn't good enough," he said. "Said I throw like a girl." Layla raised her eyebrows slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. "Girls throw just fine." He blinked. "You're that girl, aren't you? From the video." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He already knew. "Did it hurt?" he asked, quieter now. "When he came back to your house?" Layla nodded. "Yeah, but not like you think. It wasn't the fight. It was being afraid again." The boy looked away, his fingers curling tighter around the ball. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," he said. Layla stood up and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a stone, small and smooth, painted bright green. It had a single word on it, "Rise." She handed it to him. He stared at it for a long time before finally looking back at her. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "Keep it," she said, "and when it's your turn to stand up, remember what it means." He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His grip on the stone said it for him. Layla returned to her stand, her chest filled with something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even pride. It was readiness. Later that night, Michelle found her sitting in the living room, staring at the wall where she had taped dozens of letters from people around the country. One in particular stood out. It was written in crayon from a girl named Zoe in Kansas. It read, "I was scared to go to school because they teased me. But then I watched your story and I decided to wear my glasses again. Thank you for being brave first." Michelle read it over her daughter's shoulder and said, "You've already done so much." Layla looked at her. "But it's not just about what I've done, right?" "No," Michelle said. "It's about what you'll do next." A week later, Layla stood behind her corner and watched as a small group of children gathered in a semicircle. They were waiting for her to speak, something they had started doing without her asking. Every Friday afternoon they came by after school to hear her read stories, or give out stones, or just listen to her thoughts. She didn't try to teach them. She just shared. That Friday, she told them about fear, about how it doesn't always wear a monster's face. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it sounds like your own voice telling you to sit down. One little girl asked, "But what if no one helps us?" Layla looked at her for a moment, then said, "You still stand. Because sometimes the person you're waiting for is actually you." The children nodded. Some understood. Some would understand later. But all of them listened. That evening, Rhonda returned. She hadn't called ahead, just showed up as she always did, unannounced but always exactly when needed. She stood at the edge of the crowd of children, arms crossed, watching Layla with a faint smile. When the story circle ended, Rhonda approached the stand. "I saw the video of you talking last week," she said. "You've got a voice now." "I always had it," Layla replied. "I just didn't know how to use it." Rhonda nodded. "And now?" "Now I know when to." They sat on the porch steps together, watching the sunset. Michelle brought out lemonade, and for a while, no one spoke. Then Rhonda said, "You remember what we told you? About when it's your turn?" Layla nodded. I felt it. That knot in my stomach. That fire in my chest. I saw that boy on the curb, and I couldn't walk away. "Then you're ready," Rhonda said. Layla looked down at her hands, then out at the street where the boy with the deflated basketball now played with a new one donated by a neighbor. She watched as he passed it to another kid, both of them laughing. "I think I already started," she whispered. Later that month, Chuck stopped by too. He stayed longer than usual, helped rebuild the little roof on the stand that had been damaged in a storm. When he finished, he gave Layla a small black notebook. "I wrote a few things in the front," he said. "The rest is yours to fill." Layla opened it later that night. On the first page, in careful print, it read, "Justice isn't given, it's made. And when the world looks away, you look back. Because someone has to. Because you can." She held the notebook close, the pages cool against her chest, and for the first time in her life she felt not just strong, but responsible. Not in the heavy way, in the sacred way. One afternoon, as she sat at her corner painting a new batch of stones, a reporter passed by and asked for a quote. Layla didn't look up. She just said, "Tell them I'm not done." And she wasn't. Because somewhere another kid was being pushed down, another stand was being knocked over, another voice was being told it didn't matter. And Layla knew now, without doubt or fear, what to do when that moment came. She would rise. Because now she understood what Chuck and Rhonda had always known. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear scarves and paint stones. And sometimes the bravest thing in the world is just to stand when it's your turn. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, check out the next video on your screen.